Let's start by looking at some of the tools you might use in your project. For example, sculpting tools will help you to shape your fondant icing. A clean and designated ruler is really handy, especially for the third tutorial in this workbook. Food safe brushes that can be used to add on details or colour onto your fondant are also a good buy. A rolling pin, ideally silicone, is going to be useful for rolling out your fondant, but you can use a wooden one. You'll just need to cover it with icing sugar to prevent sticking. A cake smoother is something that's used when smoothing over your fondant icing to your cake. Cutters and stamps are really simple and easy ways to create intricate shapes out of your fondant that you can use to decorate your cakes with. And as an optional, a silicone mat is a really nice product to work upon so that your fondant doesn't stick to your work surface. Let's have a go at stamping our fondant icing. Now, I have recommended that you have at least 2 different colours of fondant icing, but if you've only got white, there is a way of adding colour so that you do have different colours and variations to your icing, which I'm going to show you in this tutorial as well. So I'm going to start off by rolling out my icing. Now, if you have got a little rolling pin like this, these rings that are on the ends, once you remove them, can give you different depths to your icing so that you get the same depth of icing all the way around rather than it being thick on one side and thin on the other. So if you want to add colour to your icing, you can use food dye or food gel like I am here. So food gel is a really intense colour. You only need a small amount of it. I think we've discussed this in previous workbooks. If you put a couple of blobs onto it and then just massage it into your fondant icing, what will happen is it's eventually going to change colour. It can be a messy job, so you might want some disposable gloves if you are trying this process. If you're using food colouring, as it's a little bit more watered down than the gel, you might need more of it. And this can be a problem when you're using fondant icing, because obviously it's going to affect the consistency. So you might need to add some icing sugar to counteract that. Now, I quite like the effect that I've got here. It's what we call marbled effect. So it's not quite mixed to create a solid colour, but I like that effect of having the different tones and variations to that blue. And as you can see, a stamping tool is really simple to use. You just stick it on the fondant as if you were cutting out a cookie. Most of them have a little plunger on top. If you push the plunger down, that's what gives you those extra details in your fondant. And then you can use one of your sculpting tools just to neaten up the edges where you might have some rough pieces of fondant. Using cutters, these work exactly the same way as using cookie cutters, so it's just a stamp for you to create a shape. But what I think is interesting is that most of these cake decorating sets come in various sizes so that you can build a sense of depth up with your shapes. I'll show you what I mean here. So I've created one flower. I've now taken the smaller version of that flower and I'm going to place it on top, but almost staggered slightly to make a more 3D flower, I guess. So you can play and experiment with the cutters you've got and try out different ways of using them. Something I'm also going to show you in this video is edible dust. So you can add shimmer to your fondant icing by using dust. These aren't that cheap and you don't necessarily need to get a whole set of them. You could just perhaps buy one colour if you wanted to give it a go, but it's not compulsory. So like I say, it's just like a mica powder. It's very fine dust that you can put on top of your fondant just to give it a little bit more texture and shimmer as well. Something you might want to experiment with is edible ink pens. So these look like just your standard felt tip pens, but they can draw onto food, and it's completely safe for you to eat it. So these are great for perhaps doing something a little bit more intricate that you can't achieve with sculpting or stamping. So if you were trying to write a message, perhaps you were designing a birthday cake and you wanted to write happy birthday without icing it on, you could use edible ink in this way. Something you have to be aware of though is that it's not like writing or drawing on paper. Obviously you're pressing into a soft surface, so if you're pressed too hard with your pen, then obviously it's going to affect the texture of your fondant. Freehand moulding is great because you don't really need any additional tools for this. This is you sculpting with your own hands. So I'm going to show you how to create a rose using what I feel is quite an easy technique to get to grips with, especially if you don't think this is your area of strength. So I'm going to start with a piece of coloured fondant icing. Obviously you could use white and then later on paint it a different colour if you had food dyes or gels. I want to create a strip but tapered towards one end, so I'm just using a standard kitchen knife to trim it off, and then all I'm doing is rolling it up with my fingers. So I'm pinching one side of it and keeping the other side open. So if I hold it up like this, you can see, and this is creating the rose petals, but it's one long continuous piece of icing. And I'm pinching the edges to make it look more fragile and delicate. You don't want the icing to be too thick and clumpy. Once you've done the rose, you could then perhaps make a leaf as well. So hopefully this tutorial has given you a few different ideas, techniques and ways that you can use the tools you've got available to you. You're not expected to go out and purchase everything that I've used here. It was just to give you some ideas and inspiration for you to get started.